The desert airfield lay quiet under the early morning haze, its long concrete runway stretching across the sand like a blade. The wind was still, the sky held a pale orange glow, and inside the most secure hangar on the base, the aircraft that almost no one in the world had ever seen waited in silence, its shape hidden under layers of classified tarps, its edges sharp enough to cut the light around it. This was the prototype SR-72 Darkstar, and today for the first time it would attempt a full-power hypersonic systems run. At the edge of the hangar stood Mach, a veteran test pilot with more hours in secret aircraft than in regular fighters. He didn't smile much. He didn't talk more than he needed to. He was the type of pilot who treated each mission as a final exam. If he was nervous, no one knew. Beside him was Derek, the lead propulsion engineer, tall, calm, constantly checking numbers on his tablet. Derek had been fighting technical battles for years just to get this aircraft to even sit still on its landing gear, and now he was responsible for making sure its twin combined cycle engines didn't rip themselves apart the moment they woke up. A small team of specialists moved around them, crew chiefs, avionics techs, security officers, each trained to do their part without asking questions. On this base, information was divided like sealed compartments in a submarine. Only what you needed, nothing more. The intercom crackled. Test window begins in 5 minutes. All crew to stations. Mach took a slow breath. Derek wiped his hands on his uniform. Both looked toward the hangar doors as they began to slide open, revealing the runway bathed in morning light. As the last rays entered the hangar, the tarps were removed from the aircraft. The Darkstar stood exposed, long, narrow, and almost unreal in its design. Its body blended angles and curves in a way that suggested it didn't fully belong to this century. The engines were tucked deep into the fuselage, hidden behind panels designed to swallow air and reshape it like a blade. The jet had no vertical tail, no traditional air intakes. Its skin shimmered with heat-resistant coating that looked like metallic obsidian. Even while standing still, it looked fast. Mach whispered under his breath, "Still hard to believe this thing is real." Derek didn't reply. He was reading the thermal sensor outputs, watching heat maps form across the screen. Everything was green. Everything was ready. At the far end of the hangar, Commander Lewis walked in. He was older, stern, and carried the weight of every test failure and success the base had ever seen. His voice was steady. "Gentlemen, today isn't about breaking Mach numbers. Today is about proving that this machine belongs in our skies. Keep it clean, keep it controlled." Mach nodded. "Understood." Derek added, "All systems prepared." The commander looked at the aircraft for a long moment. If this works, the world won't see it coming. They all knew what he meant. The SR-72 wasn't just fast, it was a surveillance and strike platform built for a world changing faster than old doctrines could keep up with. Hypersonic missiles were becoming common. Hypersonic aircraft were not. If the Darkstar succeeded, it would outfly anything hostile, outrun any interceptor, and gather intelligence at speeds that made satellites seem slow. But getting to that future required surviving this morning. Mach climbed the ladder to the cockpit. The glass canopy was tinted dark, almost mirror-like. Inside, the controls were minimal: screens, touch panels, and a stick designed for high-speed stability. The seat felt different, shaped to hold a pilot still during brutal acceleration. Every strap felt like it belonged in a weapon system rather than an aircraft. Ground crew connected power umbilicals. Derek called out each subsystem as it came alive. Avionics stable. Flight control surfaces responding. Fuel flow nominal. Engine 1, standby. Engine 2, standby. Inside the cockpit, Mark flipped switches in a smooth rhythm. The canopy lowered with a hydraulic hiss, locking him inside. He stared ahead at the long runway. He whispered to himself, "Darkstar, let's see what you can do." Outside, Derek gave the hand signal. "Begin engine sequence." A low rumble filled the hangar. Not loud, just deep, as if the Earth itself was reacting. The engines weren't like normal jet engines. They were quiet at low power, almost unsettlingly so. The air around the exhaust shimmered with vibrating heat. Commander Lewis watched, jaw tight. "Stabilize it. No spikes." Derek leaned closer to the screen. Holding. Good. Very good. The rumble grew. The aircraft's nose lifted slightly as internal systems aligned. The thermal panels on the underside glowed faint gold as they absorbed the early heat load. Mark's voice came through the comms. "Control surfaces online. Pressure systems nominal. She's steady." Derek finally exhaled. "She's ready for taxi." Commander Lewis nodded. "Let's move." As the hangar doors opened fully, sunlight poured across the Darkstar, giving it a sharp, predatory outline. The first motion of its landing gear echoed across the concrete. And with that slow, deliberate roll forward, the Mach 6 jet meant to dominate the future began its very first step into the open world. The SR-72 Darkstar rolled out of the hangar like a shadow sliding across the concrete. Its landing gear barely made a sound. Each wheel fitted with specialized composite tires built to handle blistering heat during high-speed landings. The sun had climbed higher now, bright enough to make the jet's dark skin shimmer with a metallic blue tint. Every crew member on the ramp paused to watch it move. Even those who weren't cleared for details knew they were looking at something historic. Mark guided the aircraft with the SR-72 Darkstar rolled out of the hangar like a shadow sliding across the concrete. Its landing gear barely made a sound. Each wheel fitted with specialized composite tires built to handle blistering heat during high-speed landings. The sun had climbed higher now, bright enough to make the jet's dark skin shimmer with a metallic blue tint. Every crew member on the ramp paused to watch it move. Even those who weren't cleared for details knew they were looking at something historic. Mark guided the aircraft with careful inputs. The nose gently shifted left, then right, the control surfaces responding in a smooth, almost unnatural silence. Inside the cockpit, the displays lit up with data: airflow pressure, thermal load, engine cycle status, sensor health. Everything appeared stable, but Mark knew better than to trust appearances. Hypersonic machines had a way of hiding problems until the last second. Meanwhile, Derek jogged alongside the towpath, tablet in hand, checking thermal maps and stress readings. The combined cycle engines were the biggest challenge. They operated like turbojets at low speeds, but once airborne and fast enough, they shifted into ramjet mode, swallowing supersonic air and compressing it naturally, allowing speeds no traditional aircraft could survive. That shift was where everything could go wrong. It only took one unstable pressure spike to tear the airframe apart. At the edge of the taxi lane, Mark stopped the aircraft as ground crew approached with the final checks. One of them, a veteran crew chief named Tom, spoke into his headset. "Control, Darkstar is at holding point Alpha. All ground checks ready." Commander Lewis responded from the control tower. "Proceed with full systems rundown before runway entry." Derek stepped closer to Tom. "Watch the thermal signatures on the belly. The panels are warming faster than we predicted." Tom nodded. "We've got the sensors locked. If it spikes, we'll call it." Mark heard everything through the comms. His grip tightened on the stick. He wasn't afraid, but he wasn't foolish. At Mach 6, fear wasn't a weakness. It was a survival tool. He ran his eyes over the primary display. Engine 1, 41% idle. Engine 2, 42% idle. Cooling flow, normal. Fuel mix nominal. Control surfaces green across the board. The aircraft was alive. He said calmly, "Control, this is Mark, requesting permission to enter the runway." Commander Lewis paused before responding. He could almost hear him thinking through the risks. Then, "Darkstar, you are cleared to line up on runway 3. Mark eased the throttles. The aircraft rolled forward again, crossing the painted lines until it aligned perfectly with a long stretch of asphalt. The runway shimmered in the heat, creating a wavering mirage effect. Out in the far distance, a row of mountains looked like they were floating. Derek took his spot at the telemetry station, screens glowing around him. Engineers crowded behind, watching every number climb, shift, and stabilize. "Commencing pre-run-up checklist," Mark said, flipping switches. The cockpit hummed as systems armed themselves. Fuel pumps surged, stability augmentation activated, thermal skin preheating engaged, navigation aligned. The aircraft felt tighter, more alert. Inside the control tower, Commander Lewis folded his arms as he stood behind the mission controller. "Keep your eyes on engine cycle temperatures," he warned. "If they move too fast, we abort." On the runway, wind brushed across the canopy. Mark inhaled slowly. He wasn't taking off today. He wasn't allowed to. Today was a static engine test, a high-power ground run to simulate early hypersonic transition. Even without wheels leaving the ground, the risk was enormous. Derek's voice entered the channel. "Mark, bring engines to 60%. Copy. Advancing throttles." The engines responded instantly. A deep vibration spread through the airfield. The exhaust shimmered hotter, a rippling distortion behind the jet. Sand lifted into the air. The air trembled. Instrument needles climbed. Derek watched the heat map grow more intense. 60% achieved. Stable, stable. Commander Lewis leaned in. "Hold for 10 seconds. Those 10 seconds felt longer than the whole morning. Mark held the throttles. Sweat gathered at his temple. The aircraft was vibrating more now, but still stable. He kept his breathing slow, his mind clear. Flying any hypersonic machine demanded a pilot who could stay relaxed under pressure. Literally. Derek checked another line. Structural load stable, thermal flow normal. Commander Lewis nodded. Proceed to 75%. Mark pushed the throttles forward. The engines roared deeper, but not louder. The sound was strange, like thunder rolling inside a metal canyon. The runway lights trembled. The nose dipped slightly as the airframe compressed under the pressure. Derek's readings flashed yellow. Commander, engine 2 pressure oscillation forming. Cycle instability at threshold. Commander Lewis didn't hesitate. Abort. Abort now. Mark pulled the throttles back instantly. The Darkstar rumbled, shook, then slowly calmed. A long silence followed. Then Mark spoke quietly. Control? System stabilizing. She held longer than expected. Derek stared at the screen. That oscillation? It means she's close. Really close. Commander Lewis exhaled. We're pushing into new territory. Tomorrow, we go again. The tension didn't disappear. It simply shifted. Because everyone now understood something. The SR-72 Darkstar wasn't failing. It was awakening. Dawn broke again over the desert range, painting the sand with soft colors while the hangar crews prepared the Darkstar for another attempt. The previous day's data had shaken everyone, not because something went wrong, but because something almost went right. The pressure oscillation in Engine 2 showed the aircraft was very close to a stable transition point. Too close, perhaps. That kind of borderline behavior was dangerous, unpredictable, and exactly what hypersonic testing often looked like. Inside the operations building, Derek sat at a digital table surrounded by floating screens filled with graphs. His eyes were red from lack of sleep. He'd stayed most of the night studying the readings, trying to find the exact moment the engine began to shift from turbojet flow to early ram compression. He playfully tapped one graph with his stylus. "There," he muttered. "Right there. That's where she tried to leap too fast." Commander Lewis walked in. "You sleep?" "Not enough to matter," Derek replied. Lewis studied the graphs. "Explain it." Derek zoomed in on a pressure waveform. It rose smoothly, dipped slightly, then spiked with dangerous unpredictability. Engine 2 tried to enter pseudo-ram mode too early. She wanted to transition. "That's good." "I hear a but coming." Derek nodded. "But she can't do it on the ground. Even with the airflow generators, there's not enough high-speed intake pressure. She's acting like she's already at Mach 2 when she's barely moving." Lewis folded his arms. "So what's the fix?" "We limit the engine cycle at 70%, hold it longer, and let the system stabilize. Then, tomorrow, we go airborne." Lewis stared at him. "You sure?" "As sure as anyone can be when testing something that's never existed before." Lewis sighed. "Then I'll brief Mark." Out on the tarmac, Mark walked around the SR-72 during pre-checks, touching the wing edges and panel seams like a surgeon preparing for a difficult procedure. He knew the aircraft better than anyone except Derek. He knew how she responded, how she shook under load, and how she felt when the engine started to bite the air. The aircraft techs approached him. One handed him a diagnostic tablet. "Control surfaces recalibrated. Panel 6 cooling issue fixed. Engine 2 manual override installed." Mark nodded. "Good. Let's keep her happy." Tom, the crew chief, walked up next. "You really think today goes smoother?" Mark didn't look up from the aircraft's underside. "Smooth doesn't exist in hypersonic work. Survive is good enough." Tom let out a thin laugh. "Copy that." When Mark climbed the ladder into the cockpit, the morning was still quiet. But the stillness didn't calm him. It felt like the quiet before a test range shook itself awake. He strapped in, pulled the canopy lever, and listened to the familiar hydraulic hiss as the glass sealed him inside. The world outside muted instantly. "This jet wants to run. We just have to hold the leash a little longer." Inside the operations building, Derek sat at a digital table surrounded by floating screens filled with graphs. His eyes were red from lack of sleep. He'd stayed most of the night studying the readings, trying to find the exact moment the engine began to shift from turbojet flow to early ram compression. He playfully tapped one graph with his stylus. "There," he muttered. "Right there. That's where she tried to leap too fast." Commander Lewis walked in. "You sleep?" "Not enough to matter," Derek replied. Lewis studied the graphs. "Explain it." Derek zoomed in on a pressure waveform. It rose smoothly, dipped slightly, then spiked with dangerous unpredictability. Engine 2 tried to enter pseudo-ram mode too early. She wanted to transition. "That's good." "I hear a but coming." Derek nodded. "But she can't do it on the ground. Even with the airflow generators, there's not enough high-speed intake pressure. She's acting like she's already at Mach 2 when she's barely moving." Lewis folded his arms. "So what's the fix?" "We limit the engine cycle at 70%, hold it longer, and let the system stabilize. Then, tomorrow, we go airborne." Lewis stared at him. "You sure?" "As sure as anyone can be when testing something that's never existed before." Lewis sighed. "Then I'll brief Mark." On the runway again, the aircraft aligned with the centerline. The entire base seemed to hold its breath. The test wasn't as simple as increasing throttle. This was a balancing act, letting the engines heat, but not too much, letting the airframe flex, but not too far, letting the internal systems prepare for a mode they weren't yet designed to enter. Mark's voice crackled through the speakers. "Idle power stable, no vibrations, flight controls nominal." Derek nodded to himself. "So far, so good." Lewis leaned forward. "Proceed to taxi." Derek's voice crackled through the comms. "Mark, bring power to 60% and hold for 15 seconds. Let the thermal gradients even out." Mark eased the throttles. Power rising, Holding. The rumble grew again, shaking the ground. Inside the control room, numbers danced. Stress values rose into yellow but remained steady. Heat maps were brighter but controlled. 15 seconds, Derek said. Now 70%. Slow increase. Mark pushed the throttles forward. The aircraft shook harder. The heat distortion behind the jet intensified. Panel 6 stable. Cooling holding strong, Tom reported. Derek watched the pressure graphs. Engine cycle is holding. The oscillation that had ruined the previous test appeared as a faint ripple, but this time it stopped growing. Mark spoke through the comms. She's steady. Lewis exhaled. Keep holding. 20 seconds. 25. 30. The Darkstar thundered like a contained storm, and for the first time, the systems behaved exactly as predicted. Derek whispered to himself, "She wants the sky." Lewis nodded slowly. "Tomorrow, we give it to her." The test ended without alarms, without spikes, without near failure. But the tension grew stronger, because everyone understood the ground was no longer enough. The next step would be the most dangerous yet. The first true flight. The next morning began with an unusual silence across the base, the kind of silence that carried weight. Everyone knew what was planned. Today, the SR-72 Darkstar would leave the ground for the first time. It wouldn't try for Mach 6. It wouldn't even try for Mach 3. Today was about proving the aircraft could fly, stay stable, return safely, and give engineers the data they needed for future hypersonic attempts. But even a simple first flight of a hypersonic jet was anything but simple. Inside the briefing room, a large digital display showed the flight plan. Takeoff, climb to 20,000 feet, accelerate modestly, then run a controlled systems cycle test at sub-hypersonic speeds before returning for landing. Nothing about it involved extreme speed, yet every line on the plan felt like a gamble. Mark sat alone at the front row, wearing his flight suit, helmet beside him. He wasn't nervous, he was focused. The room's dim light highlighted the calm determination on his face. Commander Lewis entered, with Derek behind him, carrying a tablet full of revised engine data. Lewis spoke first, his voice firm. "Today isn't about breaking records. Today is about bringing her home in one piece. We do this slow, we do this controlled." Derek placed the tablet on the table. Engine 2's behavior yesterday was promising, no oscillations, but once airborne, airflow changes everything. We'll need you to keep throttle transitions smooth, no sudden pushes. Mark nodded. "I know her limits." "That's the problem. Her limits aren't fully mapped yet." Lewis leaned in. "Mark, if anything feels off, anything at all, you abort, you land. No heroics." Mark allowed a brief smile. "I don't get paid for heroics." Lewis didn't smile back. "Just bring her home." Out on the runway, the Darkstar stood fully exposed to the morning light. The maintenance crews had polished its surface, checked every panel, inspected every seam. The aircraft looked aggressive yet elegant, like a spear forged for the sky. Tom walked with Mark toward the ladder. "Everything looks clean. Sensors calibrated, tires topped for the run. She's as ready as she'll ever be." Mark paused at the base of the ladder. "Good work, Tom. If I owe anyone a drink after this, it's your team." Tom smirked. "Make it back, and I'll hold you to that." Mark climbed into the cockpit. The seat embraced him like it already knew the mission. He secured his harness, lowered the canopy, and in an instant, the world outside faded into mute silence. He ran through the controls with practiced precision. Control surfaces, green. Avionics, stable. Oxygen, on. Engine ignition, ready. Derek's voice came through the comm. "Darkstar, you are cleared for engine start." Mark flipped the ignition switches. The engines came alive, soft at first, then growing into that deep, heart-vibrating resonance. The cockpit vibrated lightly. Lights across the panels shifted from amber to green. "Idle power stable." Commander Lewis replied, "Proceed to taxi." Mark eased the throttles. The aircraft rolled forward, nose guiding smoothly. As the jet approached the runway, every ground crew member stepped back, giving it space as if instinctively respecting the danger and beauty of the machine. At the runway threshold, Mark lined up along the center line. He looked at the horizon, a thin, bright line waiting for him. Derek's voice crackled through the comm. All telemetry receiving, flight path is clear. Minimal winds, you are go for takeoff. Lewis added, Mark, you fly this thing like it's holding a grenade under the seat. Mark smiled inside his helmet. Understood. He tightened his grip on the throttle. Darkstar beginning takeoff roll. He pushed forward. The engines roared deeper. The aircraft launched down the runway faster than expected. The acceleration smooth, powerful, almost predatory. The nose began to lighten, the front wheel dancing barely off the surface. Speed alive, 120 knots, 150, 180. Mark pulled back gently on the stick. The wheels lifted. The runway dropped away. For a moment, the aircraft felt weightless. The SR-72 Darkstar was in the air. Inside the control room, cheers nearly broke protocol, but Commander Lewis raised his hand. Stay focused, track everything. Derek's eyes scanned the data wildly. Airspeed stable, structural load minimal, heat manageable. She's flying beautifully. Mark leveled the jet at 10,000 feet, then climbed. Darkstar climbing to 20,000 feet. Controls responsive, no vibration. Lewis replied, maintain climb, begin system cycle when ready. At altitude, Mark started the next phase. He increased power slowly. 30%, 40, 50. The engine shifted tone, a smoother, more hungry sound. Derek watched the readings. Transition indicators nominal, airflow stable. Mark held the throttles. The jet sliced through the sky with quiet dominance. At 55% power, a light tremor ran through the jet. Mark frowned, feeling a slight flutter on left intake. Derek straightened. We see it, it's minor, but keep it in check. Mark steadied the aircraft, adjusting pitch slightly. The tremor faded. Derek whispered, good recovery. Lewis added, if it returns, you abort the cycle. Mark nodded, understood. He eased the throttle back to 40%. The aircraft stabilized. The first flight was a success. When Mark began the descent, every eye at the base watched him through binoculars and cameras. The landing gear extended smoothly. The jet aligned with the runway like it belonged there. Touchdown was clean, smooth, controlled. The SR-72 Darkstar rolled to a stop. Inside the tower, Lewis finally smiled. Welcome back, Darkstar. Derek leaned back in relief. She's ready for the next chapter. But Mark, as he powered down the cockpit, felt something deeper. The jet hadn't been pushed. It hadn't been tested. It hadn't shown its true nature. That would come next, and it would be far more dangerous.
The days following the first flight were intense. The success had energized the entire base, but it also brought a new level of pressure. Everyone knew what had to come next. The data from the flight show that the Darkstar handled low-altitude, low-speed conditions well. Control was stable. Thermal load was predictable. Engine behavior had improved. But the aircraft had not been tested where it mattered. High altitude, high speed, high stress. This next test would push the SR-72 into the zone where the real dangers lived. Inside the mission planning room, the mood was serious. A large digital model of the SR-72 rotated slowly over a table. Dozens of stress markers blinked on different parts of the airframe, showing where heating and compression would intensify during high-speed flight. Mark stood next to Derek, both studying the data. Commander Lewis stood at the front of the room, hands behind his back, addressing the gathered team. Today is the first high-speed transition test. We'll climb to 45,000 feet and accelerate to Mach 2.2. From there, Mark will initiate the pre-hypersonic engine cycle and hold it for 18 seconds. Tom, the crew chief, shifted uncomfortably. 18 seconds? Lewis nodded. Based on yesterday's numbers, that's the longest the structure can handle safely. Derek added, the left intake flutter is our biggest concern. At Mach 2, any instability amplifies 5 times. If it becomes harmonic, Mark interrupted calmly, the intake could collapse. The room fell silent. Derek sighed. Yes, so every throttle movement must be smooth, every pitch change controlled. The aircraft will be tested in ways we haven't simulated perfectly. Lewis looked at Mark. Still confident? Mark nodded. She'll fly, and I'll bring her back. Hours later, the Darkstar stood on the runway again, surrounded by a heavier security presence. High-speed tests meant higher risk and higher classification levels. Only cleared personnel were even allowed to watch. The morning sky was clear with thin cirrus streaks at high altitude. Perfect conditions. Tom approached Mark at the base of the ladder. Everything is tight. Panel reinforcements installed. Intake sensors recalibrated. This is as good as she gets. Mark placed a hand on Tom's shoulder. Then let's give her a run. He climbed into the cockpit. The canopy sealed, systems powered up like a rising heartbeat. Control, Darkstar ready for taxi. Derek's voice responded immediately. Telemetry online, all systems reading nominal. Lewis added, proceed. Mark guided the aircraft to the runway threshold. This time there was no long pause, no hesitation, no ceremonial words. He exhaled once, steady and focused. Darkstar, beginning takeoff roll. The engines roared with more intensity than during the first flight. The jet surged forward, accelerating harder, faster. The runway raced beneath him. The nose lifted smoothly. Positive rate, gear up. The aircraft climbed like a missile. 10,000 feet, 20,000 feet, 30,000 feet. The sky darkened to a deep blue as the earth curved below. Inside the control center, Derek monitored numbers streaming down the screens. Altitude passing 35,000, 40,000, pressure stable. At 45,000 feet, Mark leveled off. The world beneath him was quiet, distant. Control, preparing for acceleration. Lewis's voice came through, firm and steady. Proceed, Godspeed. Mark pushed the throttles forward. The aircraft responded instantly. Mach 1.3, Mach 1.7, Mach 2.0. Airframe vibrations increased. The Darkstar sliced through the sky like a heated blade. Then there it was. A slight tremor from the left intake. Mark adjusted pitch by 1 degree, then trimmed the nose. The tremor reduced, but did not disappear. Derek, I have light flutter. Manageable. Derek's voice sharpened. We see it. Try 2 degrees up. Mark adjusted. The flutter eased. Better. Derek replied. Hold that configuration. Now came the dangerous part. Control, preparing to enter pre-hypersonic cycle. Derek swallowed. Understood. Begin throttle shift, slowly. Mark eased the throttles forward millimeter by millimeter. Inside the engines, the airflow dynamics changed violently, the turbines pushing against air that wanted to compress itself into ramjet pressure. The transition had to be perfect. Heat surged across the underside panels. Thermal maps flared orange. Stress warnings blinked. The airframe trembled. Then it hit. A sudden, jarring vibration. The kind that didn't feel like normal flutter. Mark clenched the controls. Cycle instability forming. Left intake pressure spike. In the control room, alarms flashed red. Lewis barked. Abort! Abort now! But Mark didn't answer immediately. The aircraft shook violently. The cockpit rattled. The left side engine temperature surged. Derek shouted, Mark, shut down transition! Shut it down now! Mark's fingers moved fast, pulling the cycle override, cutting the throttle back to turbojet mode. The aircraft fought him like a wild animal. For 2 terrifying seconds, he wasn't sure the transition would reverse. Then, the engine coughed, stabilized, flattened into normal tone. The aircraft steadied, though still trembling. Mark exhaled. Transition aborted. She's holding. Structural integrity at 70%. That was close. Derek closed his eyes in relief. Mark, bring her home. And Lewis added quietly, and thank you for not pushing further. The flight back down was controlled, tense, and silent. When the SR-72 finally touched down, it rolled for nearly half a mile before slowing enough for Mark to breathe normally. Ground crews swarmed the aircraft. When Mark climbed out, Tom looked pale. How bad was it? Mark stared at the aircraft. Bad enough to tell us something important. Derek approached. What's that? Mark turned to him. She won't hit Mach 6 until we figure out that intake. But she's wanting to, and she's fighting to get there.
Lewis muttered, "Then we fix it." But none of them knew. The next test would demand more from the aircraft and from Mark than anything so far.
The hangar was quieter than usual the next morning. Not silent, just tense. Every footstep echoed with purpose. Every whispered conversation carried weight. Yesterday's near disaster had revealed two things: the Darkstar's incredible potential and the unforgiving danger that came with pushing it. Engine 2's intake spike had nearly ended the program in a single moment. But instead of pulling back, the team was preparing for the most critical test yet, a controlled attempt at Mach 3.5 with a partial ram compression cycle. Still well below true hypersonic flight, but high enough to reveal whether the jet could survive the brutal aerodynamic forces waiting above. Inside the systems lab, Derek stood over a holographic display of the intake structure. Engineers surrounded him, adjusting parameters and recalibrating airflow predictions. "This is where the problem starts," Derek said, pointing at the transition point in the intake throat. "The airflow is too turbulent at high subsonic speeds. It slams into the compression chamber unevenly." Tom frowned. "So what do we do? Reinforce it? Add stability fins?" Derek shook his head. "No. Reinforcement increases weight. Stability fins disrupt the airflow." Commander Lewis entered the room, his boots echoing loudly. "Then what's the solution?" Derek zoomed in further. "We don't fight the turbulence. We channel it. We're installing micro-adjusting baffles inside the intake. Tiny modular plates that automatically correct airflow direction during cycle shifts." Tom raised an eyebrow. "Will they hold at Mach 3? Derek didn't blink. "They have to." Lewis crossed his arms. "Get them installed. The next test is today." 4 hours later, the Darkstar sat on the open ramp, panels removed as crews installed the new baffles. The aircraft looked like a beast being prepared for battle. Metallic ribs exposed, engine housings opened, sensors glowing. Mark arrived, walking with his helmet under his arm. His face showed no fear, no excitement, just the calm determination he carried into every mission. Tom greeted him with a tight nod. "New intake systems installed. She's different inside, but should feel the same from the cockpit." Mark ran a hand along the fuselage. "Does she know we're about to push her harder?" Tom smirked softly. "Oh, she knows." Derek approached, tablet in hand. "This test is dangerous. If the baffles don't react fast enough, the intake could surge again. We want throttle movements slower than slow, no sudden changes." Mark looked him straight in the eyes. "I'll fly it by feel. She'll tell me what she needs." Lewis arrived last. "Listen carefully. Today is not optional. Headquarters wants proof the SR-72 can make real progress, but they also want you alive. You abort at the first sign of trouble, understood?" "Understood," Mark replied. On the runway, the Darkstar lined up again. But this time, the air felt heavier, as if the sky itself was watching. "Control, Darkstar beginning takeoff roll," Mark said. The engines ignited with deeper resonance than ever before. The aircraft surged forward, lifting off with smooth power. Within minutes, Mark climbed past 30,000 feet, then 40,000 feet, then 55,000 feet. The sky darkened to deep indigo, stars faintly glowing, even in daylight. "Altitude at 60,000, Mark reported. "Preparing acceleration." Derek monitored the numbers like a surgeon watching a heartbeat. "Begin throttle increase." Mark pushed forward gently.
Mach 1.5, Mach 2.0, Mach 2.6. The aircraft trembled slightly, but the tremor was different this time. Smoother, controlled. Baffles responding, Derek said. Airflow stable. Keep going. Mark pushed further. Mach 3.0. The engines changed tone, deeper, hungrier. Control, cycle dynamics are clean, Mark said. Beginning partial transition. He eased the throttle forward another millimeter. The cockpit shook. Outside, the air compressed violently around the fuselage, forming shimmering shock ripples. Derek's eyes widened. Transition chamber stable. Intake pressure holding. No oscillations. For the first time, the Darkstar behaved like it wanted to cross into a new speed realm. Mark steadied the controls. She's smooth, very smooth. Lewis leaned forward. Hold the cycle. Don't push further. The aircraft held at Mach 3.5 for 10 seconds. 11. 12. Then, the moment everyone feared. A harsh alarm blared through Mark's handset. Warning, skin temperature rising beyond safe margin. Derek scanned the heat map. Panel 9 overheating, cooling failing. Lewis shouted, abort, now! Mark didn't hesitate. He cut the throttle, disengaged transition, pitched the nose up 2 degrees to bleed speed. The aircraft shook violently as it dropped from high-speed compression. The baffles snapped back into neutral. Heat levels slowly fell. The aircraft leveled out at Mach 1.8. Mark exhaled, chest tight. Transition aborted, aircraft stable, returning to base. Derek slumped into his seat. Panel 9 almost gave out, but the intake worked perfectly. Lewis muttered, "We solved the heat, and she'll reach hypersonic." Mark brought the aircraft home carefully, landing with a smooth, quiet rollout. When he climbed down, Tom nabbed him first. That was the closest yet. Mark smiled faintly. And the hottest. Derek approached with the data. The new baffles worked. We fixed the intake. The next enemy is heat. Lewis stepped forward. Then we solve heat next. After that, Mach 6. They all looked at the aircraft, still steaming, still alive, like it was a living creature, daring them to push it again. The Darkstar's final test was coming, and it would decide everything.
The next 48 hours became a race against heat, not the desert heat outside, but the invisible thermal forces that nearly tore the Darkstar apart at Mach 3.5. Inside the hangar, engineers worked like a frontline repair crew, replacing panels, upgrading insulation, and running simulations around the clock. Panel 9, the one that overheated, was stripped off entirely. The exposed section of the fuselage looked wounded, like the aircraft had survived a blast. Derek and Tom stood over the open paneling, staring at thermal sensors that still glowed faint amber. Tom shook his head. We got lucky. Another 5 seconds and this thing would have warped beyond repair. Derek exhaled. But we learned something. The airflow held. The transition held. Only the thermal load failed. That means we're close. Unbelievably close. Commander Lewis entered the hangar carrying a file of directives from above. His expression was firm, carved with pressure. Washington wants one final demonstration, a full hypersonic attempt, Mach 5 minimum, partial ram compression, no full ramjet mode. But they want the world to know we're on the threshold. Mark stepped forward, arms crossed. That's not a small request. Lewis nodded. They're not asking, they're expecting. Derek looked uneasy. We can reinforce the panels using ceramic layering and heat-distributing filaments. But at Mach 5, everything changes. Airflow becomes like concrete. Temperatures reach levels no aircraft traditionally survives. Mark kept his voice calm. Can she do it? Everyone looked at Derek. He stared at the aircraft, the silent, powerful predator resting on its gear. Finally, he said, She can, if you fly her perfectly.
By noon the next day, the Darkstar was restored, upgraded, and more dangerous looking than ever. Most of its surface was now covered in a heat-glazed coating, shimmering with reflective patterns designed to push thermal load away from critical areas. Panel 9, the one that overheated, was stripped off entirely. The exposed section of the fuselage looked wounded, like the aircraft had survived a blast. Derek and Tom stood over the open paneling, staring at thermal sensors that still glowed faint amber. Tom shook his head. "We got lucky. Another 5 seconds and this thing would have warped beyond repair." Derek exhaled. "But we learned something. The airflow held. The transition held. Only the thermal load failed. That means we're close. Unbelievably close." Commander Lewis entered the hangar, carrying a file of directives from above. His expression was firm, carved with pressure. "Washington wants one final demonstration, a full hypersonic attempt, Mach 5 minimum, partial ram compression, no full ramjet mode, but they want the world to know we're on the threshold." Mark stepped forward, arms crossed. "That's not a small request." Lewis nodded. "They're not asking, they're expecting." Derek looked uneasy. "We can reinforce the panels using ceramic layering and heat-distributing filaments. But at Mach 5, everything changes. Airflow becomes like concrete. Temperatures reach levels no aircraft traditionally survives." Mark kept his voice calm. "Can she do it?" Everyone looked at Derek. He stared at the aircraft, the silent, powerful predator resting on its gear. Finally he said, "She can, if you fly her perfectly." By noon the next day, the Darkstar was restored, upgraded, and more dangerous looking than ever. Most of its surface was now covered in a heat-glazed coating, shimmering with reflective patterns designed to push thermal load away from critical areas. Panel 9, the one that overheated, was replaced with a new alloy that had only been tested in labs. Tom stepped back from the jet. "She looks ready for war." Derek replied, "She looks ready for the edge of physics." As Mark suited up, Commander Lewis pulled him aside. "This is the closest we've come to the real mission. Once she breaks Mach 5, we'll have proven everything needed for full production." Mark nodded. "And if she doesn't?" Lewis didn't soften his expression. "Then this program dies." The simplicity of the statement settled like a weight. Mark took a breath. "Then let's not let it die." The Darkstar rolled out to the runway one last time. The sky above was clear, wide, and waiting. Ground crews stood farther back than usual, not for safety protocols, but out of respect. The aircraft now carried a presence none of them could fully explain. "Control, this is Darkstar. Systems green. Taxiing. Telemetry receiving. Godspeed, Mark." Lewis added, "This is the big one. Do what you do best." Mark lined up with the center line. He didn't speak again. He simply pushed the throttles forward. The engines thundered, louder, deeper, sharper. The aircraft launched like a projectile, lifting off almost instantly. The climb was rapid, smooth, powerful. 20,000 feet? 40,000? 60,000? The sky thinned to near black. Control, at 70,000 feet, beginning acceleration. "Proceed," Derek replied. Mark pushed forward. Mach 2.5. Mach 3.0. Mach 3.7. The tremors came, but they were controlled, shaped by the new baffles. Mach 4.2. Mach 4.5. The thermal coatings began to glow orange at the edges. "Skin temperature rising," Derek warned. "Within limits," Mark replied. Mach 4.8. The aircraft shook violently for a moment, the kind of shake that even Mark gripped the controls harder. "Left side heating spike," Derek shouted. "Holding course," Mark said. His voice remained calm. Lewis leaned forward. "She can't stay there long. 3 seconds, maybe 4. Mark stared ahead into the dark sky. Pushing for Mach 5. He eased the throttles forward. The engines roared with a new tone, deeper, more predatory. Air compressed with violent force along the nose and fuselage. Mach 5.0. The cockpit shook. Warning lights flashed. Heat rippled across the aircraft like a living flame. Derek's voice cracked. "Panel 9 at critical." Mark steadied the stick. He held the speed. 1 second.
2, 3, 4. Then he spoke. Control. Mach 5 achieved. Beginning throttle reduction. The room erupted, but quietly, not with celebratory shouts, but with the overwhelmed silence of people witnessing history. The aircraft slowed. Mach 4, 3, 2. The shaking stopped. The sky brightened. The aircraft eased into level flight. Mark exhaled a long, steady breath. Control. Returning to base. The landing was flawless. When Mark stepped onto the tarmac, Derek, Tom, and Lewis were waiting for him. They didn't speak. They just looked at him. Then at the aircraft, then back at him. Derek finally said, "You just proved the impossible." Lewis added, "Congratulations, Mark. You didn't just fly the Darkstar." He looked at the jet, still steaming from heat. "You tamed it." Mark touched the side of the aircraft, feeling warmth through his glove. "She wasn't fighting today. She was showing us what comes next." Tom grinned. "And what comes next?" Mark stared at the shimmering fuselage. Mach 6.